It was actually serendipitous. At the time when I was 17, it was more of being rebellious than it was knowing that I was going to create something that vast at that point. It was a desire to do it my way as opposed to doing it the way that I thought was a broken model. I had worked and interned in a kindergarten and worked and interned in another early childhood program, a daycare center really at the time, and I was really surprised at how adults didn't understand how to work with children and were much more educated and decided I needed to do it my way. And so at that, I just basically went and rented an apartment and started it from there. Every entrepreneur knows that challenge is the fundamental word that you breathe through on a regular basis, because if you weren't enthralled by challenge, you wouldn't be an entrepreneur. So every day was a challenge, and yes, there were times that I was wondering week after week if I was going to make payroll and wondering if I was going to be able to pay the mortgage and the bills. So yes, very challenging. However, I knew that was the way to go based on other models that were out there that I was experiencing at the time. And so I kept, in a very scrappy entrepreneur way, looking for resources. So when you talk about support and help, if you pay attention and you are plugged in, to the divine, really, or what your, wisdom is and your connection to something higher than you, there's signs all over the place, right? And, opportunities show up and someone tells you about a grant project, or they tell you about a funding source, or they tell you about a partnership, and do you have the courage to go explore that? Do you have the courage to step in with 2 feet and say, I can do this, and this feels right and makes sense? And it doesn't always feel perfect, but you have to be developing your own instinctual capacity that, really heart of yourself to say these are the right things. And so the people that helped out were messages from the divine that gave me opportunities that it rang a bell in my head, and I followed that. I followed that bell to the end, and all the way from the funding sources to the banks to the awards were really someone sharing their gift with me, and me taking the opportunity to leverage that. Starting out, really small. It was a mom and pop small business for really the first 15 years. And, really what changed it was 2 times that it kind of hit that quantum leap of growth. One was when we opened our first corporate childcare center in 1994. A very dear friend of mine, Bill Felitis, he was a real estate developer, and it took me 2 years to convince him to let me open up the first corporate childcare in that city. And, he will refer to the experience as me being relentless. And I literally would call this guy every day because I wanted to be in this property. And when he saw what we created in the establishment, he actually referred us to other real estate developers. And so that made a big difference, having someone that had a great reputation, that believed in us, that started telling other people in the market about us. And so as a result of that, we grew 4 other locations in 2 years, 2 of them being on college campuses. And so, not only did it go in the business market, but also in the higher education market, about the difference of what it was that we were doing. And because I was, having them experience it where I was so involved, it was so impressive to them, they shared their story. So that was a big moment. And the second time that we grew really big was in 2006. We brought in a consultant to help us grow the business. And so I knew at that point that I didn't know everything, and I needed someone else to help me get there from a business model. So we brought in a consultant from Harvard Business School for a short period of time, so that we could afford to pay, and changed our entire business model, positioned us to grow in the market in a way that was very traditional and formal, and I was extremely non-traditional and non-formal. I mean, the terms that I used even in my financial model to this day, the CFO, who was my sister for 15, 16 years, we laugh about it, laugh hysterically, because fundamentally we understood it. But if anybody from regular finance ever came and looked, and they did, right, and they were like, what does that mean? And I could explain it, but not from a traditional way. So they really helped us get us positioned for the marketplace. That's another great question, and I'll give you my real answer, which was, I came into this world knowing I was going to do this. And so, when I was 5 years old, I was in kindergarten, and I can viscerally remember watching the kindergarten teachers at nap time yell at the boys. And I had no brothers, I had only sisters. And so it fascinated me that these creatures that were boys, because I didn't have a lot of exposure to boys, were bouncing off the walls, right, in a way that boys have a different type of energy than what the girls did, and that they were getting in trouble all the time, that the teachers, who were all female, didn't know how to handle them. And I just knew right then that it wasn't fair. And I thought, when I grow up, I'm going to be a teacher, and I'm going to make sure that the boys are taken care of in a fair way. Because it surprised me. And my first grade teacher remembers the first day of school, I was standing in line, and I looked up at her and I said, when I grow up, I'm going to be a teacher. And it just kind of grew from there. I loved children because it's the same concept that I still have, the same principle that I still have right now, Megan, which is that they are the closest thing to the divine, into our true nature, than any being in this world, right? They come from wherever you believe they come from, okay? My belief is they come from the divine of higher consciousness, and then they're brought into the world. And we spend the first 5 years of their lives as adults trying to impose our culture on them, instead of looking at the wisdom that they bring of authenticity and genuineness and speaking their truth. You're around kids and you can feel the magic in them. They have not been kind of clouded by the world and all of the fear-based anxiety and ego-based behaviors that adults deal with, right? That we all are challenged with. They're still very real and true. And I knew that at a very young age. You ask a child a question, they tell you the answer. Right? Until they're 4 years old, they don't develop the self-consciousness to be aware that I shouldn't say that yet. And so they're telling you their truth. When you talk to most adults, they don't have the capacity to do that. You're always wondering, are they really speaking their truth? And in fact, most of us as adults don't even know what our truth is sometimes. We spend a significant amount of time trying to tap back into, who am I? What do I really want? Right? Mm-hmm. All the time. Kids know it. Kids know it. And if you listen to them, and I had at a very young age, I had that regard, that high regard for the essence that they brought to this universe.